What is up, everybody? It is Alex from Heavy New York calling from the quarantine zone again. And this time we are here with Jordan of Dream Theater. Thanks so much for being here today, man.
Absolutely. Good to be here with you, my friend.
Of course, we got a lot to talk about, and we got A View from the Top of the World coming out very, very soon, October 22nd. Did you consider this just picking up where you left off after Distance Over Time, or was this kind of like intended to be like a new beginning for Dream Theater in a way?
Um, I guess somewhere in between. It's never as casual as just, we're going to pick, let's do another one. We're always very conscious of what it is we want to create and maybe what the times call for and what we've learned in the past. And, it's like making a Dream Theater album is no small endeavor,
Yeah.
if you will. Takes a lot on every level, especially with the whole COVID thing that's been going on. It was hard for us all to get together. So, when we got into the studio, we were like, okay, we finally made it, figured everything out, and now let's do some music. So it was kind of I guess if you could look at it from a point of view of picking up where you left off, it was like an intense kind of picking it up where you left off. I was like, okay, here we go, so
Yeah. Well,
that's,
as
that's
there's many different vibes that come from every Dream Theater album, from intense to very laid back. So I feel like the songwriting process is very similar to the experience that we, the listeners, have with each Dream Theater album.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's that blend of stylistic, kind of maybe emotional things that happen in a Dream Theater album. You get like the heavy stuff, kind of, all right, this is metal. And then you get like, wow, this is not metal. It's like really pretty. And like, all of a sudden I'm playing cello on an iPad or something, So I think that we have our usual kind of like blend and assortment of styles. It's always just a matter of how much of each or what the blend exactly is. And, song forms and lengths and stuff like that are going to change.
Do you like, and when it comes to like the making of an album or even a song, do you go into it with a preconceived idea, like, okay, let's make it sound like this, or because the music is so experimental, just trying new things and rolling the dice is just as much part of the songwriting process?
Yeah, I think that there is definitely some pre-thought with a lot of the things we create. But it's not all like kind of like written down before we even start with the song, like what it's gonna be. Usually we have an idea, like a concept, like we want this one to be unepic. We want this one to be like more dialed in and maybe a shorter form. And so it gives us a little bit of a feeling of, well, what are we trying to do? So we're not just, shooting in the dark or whatever. But that said, there's also a freedom, within this album and within usually most of our work, where we'll allow things to happen that are not necessarily planned. Like John Petrucci will play a riff, and I'll go, "Oh wow, that's cool. Well, what about this?" And I'll come up with some idea that just sparked. So there is this whole thing that happens a lot, which is that one person's idea sparks the other person's idea, which kind of has this effect, which can lead to section. And then it might be like, wow, that's a lot of stuff. Maybe one of those sections doesn't even need to be in here. So then we can also start to think about the architecture of the song. So we'll let ourselves be inspired and let the riffs come out and all the stuff, and it floods out, and we at least capture all the ideas. But then we start thinking architecturally and shaping whatever it is we're after.
hmm And this goes without saying, but the first two singles that we got from A View from the Top of the World, The Alien and Invisible Monster, that's just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the representation of the entire album, right? There's a lot more tricks and twists to be discovered.
Yeah. Are you saying that because you've heard it, or you're saying that because...
I'm saying it because I heard it.
Yeah. I think The Alien is more indicative of where this album is at than Invisible Monster. Invisible Monster was more one of these songs that we were trying to go for something a little bit more dialed in. I guess that's the way to say it. A little shorter, kind of not too complex, although it has some progressive elements in it. But The Alien is a little bit more like saying, okay, well, here's what the kind of thing is that you're going to be hearing on this album. It's one of the reasons I was kind of excited about releasing that first, was I felt like, wow, we'll put this out and people kind of understand what we've been up to these days, you know? And then of course, you know, on the album, we go in a lot of different directions. There's a whole lot more to hear, and you can't possibly guess, as you know, because you heard it, you can't possibly guess what's really coming, because there's a lot of stuff in there.
Hell yeah! Now I know that there are sometimes concept albums that are thrive within a Dream Theater album. Like I know that Metropolis Part Two, Scenes from a Memory, is very conceptually driven. I know that The Astonishing was very concept driven. Do you all sometimes maybe think of a concept before you put pen to paper and writing, and maybe that can help influence the sound of the music? Or has there always needed to be music before like an idea or a storyline could come into play?
Well, like with something like Scenes or The Astonishing, there was like a story before we even got started. So that was definitely, you know, working in that way, where you had this thing you're kind of trying to build on. Especially The Astonishing, which was a very kind of like laid out story. I mean, we remember going in the studio writing that with John, and we basically had index cards and, you know, with each scene, and we were trying to fill in and decide what music would go with the story and how to express that story musically and lyrically, of course. But when we're just making an album that's not a concept album like this one, then it's, you know, it's individual songs, and very often the concept, or most often the concept or the lyrical content comes afterwards.
Okay.
So we'll write the music, and then we'll know which parts are vocal, and then whoever's writing the words will kind of build their concept, you know, within the music that they're hearing. So yeah, it happens after the fact, after the music.
Yeah, and being a keyboard player, a fellow keyboard player, I also play piano. And like, do you almost like when you're, because I feel like the piano, the melody that's expressed through it has such an emotional and atmospheric element behind it. Do you almost, when it comes to like laying down these parts, are you focusing mainly from a theoretical standpoint, like it has to be in this key, or is it a direct expression of an emotion that you were feeling at a specific time?
Well, as someone whose approach to music is very much like breathing, you know, like for me, like sitting at the piano well, it's different, but it's just a little bit similar to like this talking, like we're having a chat right now and things are coming out. I'm saying things and I don't have a script, and it's all just what I feel and what I'm responding to your questions. That's kind of the way I approach things, you know, like we will be in a key for sure, but like, what do I want to do? What sounds good to me? What feels right? What is the flow? You know, those things, very often an idea will just come out of like almost like an improvisation. As a composer, I'll sit down, like I'll just start playing something, and it can be 4 measures, could be 8 measures, and it's like, okay, that's it. Very, very seldom does the action kind of like stop, like between chords. You know, like sometimes I'll sit and I'll go, okay, I'm on a G minor. Let's see, what do I want to really hit? Like, that's good. Maybe this one. You know, that could happen too. Where there's almost like this kind of like, it's like almost like a pencil to paper approach, where you're thinking about each chord. You know, you go, C is good there. Maybe I'll go to a C minor. No, you know, that's not really the way I make music so much. I'll do it more just by feel, by my ear, kind of the emotional direction. Just looking at my cat in the window, hoping I'm jumping on any of my synthesizers, which so far we're good. Yeah, so I mean, the approach can always be different, but as someone who's a big improviser, that very often it comes from that kind of spirit.
Do you almost like do you prefer to maybe have other music written before you start laying down your parts, or do you sometimes, like for instance, the piano introduction to a track like Forsaken, for example, that still gives me, I think that introduction pulls you in perfectly. And like,
Cool.
so like I've always thought, do you sometimes have a whole piano part written and then maybe the band would write around that, or do you prefer to maybe have other music before you start laying down your parts?
We work either way. Like sometimes, like, you know, Patricia will write something, and then I'll have to almost create like a part that goes with it, which is a different kind of a challenge, a different kind of procedure than coming up with my own thing, out of nothingness. So I mean, and it could happen the other way where I come up with something and then John's like, oh well, what am I going to play to that? It could kind of like just comp the chords or come up with an alternative part that goes with it. So we do all of the above, really. But I like to just create things out of thin air. That's really fun.
Yeah, absolutely. And isolation is such a great fuel for creativity as well. Do you maybe prefer to write parts when you're more like alone in your own element, or is it sometimes maybe better to be in the company of your other bandmates to come up with ideas?
Yeah, it's a really good question because, it's really hard in a way to write music when everybody's kind of jamming and playing and we're in the studio and it's intense. But I've kind of like gotten used to that. I mean, we do a lot of writing when we're all together. I mean, like it's not unusual for like to be working on a section. And while we're working on that section, like personally, I'm literally thinking about what could be the next section, or taking a pencil and music paper and just kind of starting to write a possibility for the next section. Because when we're done working on this section, we got to decide what happens next. And because a lot of what we're doing at this moment will feed what has to happen in the next moment. The inspiration for the next moment happens when we're, in this, present moment. So I've learned to kind of like write and even think about chords that are other than the chords I'm playing like right now, which is hard, but it's something that we do because of the nature of the way we work. That said, when I'm in a quiet space and composing, that's a lovely thing. I'm sure as a keyboard player, you want to be in your space, you want it to be quiet, you can focus and hear what you do. Not always the ideal environment. When we're working, it's a different kind of a space. But the guys might go out of the room for a little bit and I might be in there just like kind of hanging out while they're getting coffee or whatever. And then it's quite possible that that's when the cool idea will happen because there is that little bit of space.
Yeah.
So I take advantage of any moments when I can just kind of like get, a few seconds of space to bring in the idea.
Yeah, it sounds like you have the best of both worlds, which is great. Some artists are kind of confined to one method, but it almost seems like... Do you think maybe if people were to get to know you and all the members of Dream Theater, like head to toe and get to know you very well, they can listen to a song or like a pattern and be like, oh, okay, Jordan wrote this when he was alone, and he wrote this part when he was with the rest of the guys?
Well, I think that they more would be able to say, oh, this is the part that Jordan wrote. And this is the part maybe that John Petrucci wrote, kind of thing. Like that I think is clear to some fans. I mean, especially those who watch my improvisations and see all the stuff I just kind of output. They could say, oh, that's kind of like a Jordan thing, or that's clear. I don't think they'd be necessarily able to tell that this is what he did when he had like space and nobody was around, or this is what happened when everybody was in the room. I don't necessarily think that would be too obvious.
If somebody could figure that out, then they're the number one Dream Theater fan.
Right.
Now, we also have a lot to celebrate because next year is the 20-year anniversary of 6 Degrees of Inner Turbulence, which is the record that I discovered Dream Theater on, and as many people, really got on board with. I was just curious. It's kind of like two questions in one, but kind of going back, did that album at all influence to what we would hear later on albums such as, a Train of Thought or like a Dramatic Turn of Events, etc.? And two, could you maybe see you bringing back a couple deep cuts off that album when touring happens again to celebrate the 20 years?
Oh, yeah. I forget if any of that is on the set list right this minute, but that album was an important album because after we got done with Scenes from a Memory, which was an album that a lot of people discovered Dream Theater at that album. I mean, usually I find people who Images and Words was the one they heard, or like Scenes, or Octavarium. I don't hear too many people say, oh, I discovered it at 6 Degrees of Inner Turbulence. It's interesting to me that you said that because to me, that was my second album that I did. And I feel like there was a lot of kind of Jordan energy that went into that album, a lot of keyboard driven stuff that happened. And it's one of the ones I'd point to depending on who I'm talking to, oh, you want to hear something cool from Dream Theater, listen to like the second disc of like 6 Degrees. But it depends if are you a prog person or are you a metal person or where you're coming from.
Yeah.
That's going to influence my my recommendations for sure. But I think but in those days, it was opening up all the possibilities that I could give to Dream Theater as a composer. So that was, really an important time to allow those things to be seen and to be heard. And of course, once that was really clear, that carried on to other albums. Not in the sense that we referenced it so much to, do something like, 6 Degrees, but just in terms of like having everybody kind of aware of, what, who could do what or what I could offer, so.
Well, when you came into Dream Theater, being that Scenes from a Memory was your first contribution, were you kind of like looking at other albums such as Awake or Images and Words and being like, okay, this is what needs to be done? Or did you have kind of like complete full range to bring a little bit of more of your own mix? I think
Well, I would say that first of all, I liked, when I discovered Dream Theater, I thought it was really cool. I liked it. I liked that mix of prog and metal and virtuosity, and so I was interested to understand, explore, and almost like engage in like finding out more about that and internalizing it as well. Anything that wasn't already part of me from other things that I heard, I wanted to make sure that I could come into it kind of having that Dream Theater background. So it was a certain amount of analyzation almost, about the style, like what makes it tick, what's going on, what are they doing, what's working, what's not. So I did that homework as much as possible. So when I came in, I wasn't just an alien coming in from a totally different land. Of course, I had worked with John and Mike with Liquid Tension Experiment before, but that was different. That was kind of like everybody brings who they are in, and then we blend that. In this case, I was fitting into a band that had been together already for a while and have, started to make kind of a brand almost. So, yeah, I kind of lost my train of thought.
No, you answered it perfectly.
Good,
and being
good.
such a prolific artist, because you just mentioned your other projects and stuff, like between your solo career and with Dream Theater and with Liquid Tension Experiment, is it almost like a different mind frame depending on the project you're playing with, or is there a usual method behind the madness that applies to everything?
Oh man, there's always a little bit of a method behind the madness. I'm somebody who's like I'm always like creating stuff, in my head, or solo stuff or Dream Theater stuff, or working on something. So, it's a bit of a constant creative output that, that I'm providing. My challenge is to, to focus it in. And if it's going to be, like, okay, I want to make a solo album and actually stop improvising for a while and like make, make the product. Sometimes I'm like, just in my, my musical, magical world and allowing things to flow. Mm-hmm. For me, it's like kind of like bring it in. Okay, doing a Dream Theater thing, doing this.
Well, with your solo stuff, because I was wondering, maybe not even just with your solo stuff, but even with Dream Theater, like, has a lot of the songs come from improvising? Like, is it almost kind of like, have you just left the record button on and you're just taking a chunk out of that improv session?
Well, yeah, a lot of the stuff comes from improvising for sure. Matter of fact, what's really funny is that, like, because I've been doing so much improvising lately, partly because I have this Patreon that I'll do like streams and stuff like that, where I'll just turn on the, live stream and I'll start playing, and I'll play for like, whatever, 20 minutes, half an hour, 45 minutes. And sometimes while I'm playing, I'm going, man, there's some good stuff here. I could make like, a bunch of songs out of this. But of course, who's got the time to like go back and like listen to all these streams and like, that section, I can use that, or I can, use that section. I don't, but I'm like, knock on wood somewhere, like I live and breathe this stuff. So the ideas are flowing and I am who I am. And I got this kind of like progressive, classical, whatever, rock thing going on, and just kind of speak that language. So, the stuff comes out. It's and it's good that it comes out that fluidly, but sometimes that process has to be stopped so you can actually write some music.
Yeah, tamed.
Otherwise, it's all an improvisation, which is not a bad thing, but it's my own personal challenge to kind of like say, okay, well, I love to, I just get so much pleasure out of playing, and I can do all this and just play and come up with the idea after idea. But now maybe got to take a different approach.
Definitely. And
Right.
you led me perfectly into this next question, because there's one thing to have a creative idea, but then there's also creative energy. I feel like an idea has more of like an image, whereas energy is more driven. And you live and breathe this stuff. But when it comes to gathering like an idea for a songwriting mode for Dream Theater or other projects, do you almost need to like do a little bit of research? Is there almost kind of like going out and exploring in order to get that idea for inspiration, or do ideas just come out of nowhere?
Well, ideas come out of nowhere, but like sometimes, and like John Petrucci is really kind of like influential in this kind of idea. He'll be like, man, we should do something you know, like a John Williams kind of like idea, like something from a movie, and he'll like literally play something like, that inspired him. And he knows once he plays something for me that I'll pick it up and I'll go with it. Like, okay, play me a minute of John Williams, and I'll sit down and improvise for 15 minutes in that style. So he is good at triggering me to write from a certain point of view. Like maybe there's a certain kind of chord change that he was really inspired by. Go like from a D minor to an A flat major, and that has a certain sound. And I go, oh yeah, I understand what you like about that. That's cool. And so I'll kind of hit some changes that are in that vein, and then everybody smiles. So there are, I'm able to kind of like go with little influences from the outside world and make my own stuff. Yeah,
And are you ready for the most difficult question of the whole interview?
I guess so.
I've asked hundreds of artists this, but I can't think of a more appropriate band to ask this to other than Dream Theater.
Okay.
How do you know?
Okay.
How do you know when a song is done?
Wow, that's a really good question. Well, we have two modes of operation. One is where we're creating something where we know it's going to be in almost like a song form, and we don't want it to be too long. And the other operation is when we just let things go, and one musical motif gets developed, and we're playing around and we're doing things, and we just go. We start to see whatever it is, the long form or the short form. We start to see in our architecture there. We start to see how the blocks or the sections come together. And after even if it's a longer one, after writing a lot of sections, we can kind of start to create a shape. And then we might be 3 minutes in, but then we start becoming more clear, like, wow, okay, we're here, we've got a verse, we've got a pre-chorus, we've got a chorus. Now let's have a section where we can break it out and do some lead trading. And then maybe we'll go off and do this crazy Jordan thing. And then we'll do this, but then let's get back to the verse and the chorus. And then after you've stated those things, now it's time to write the finale, because we did our thing, we've got our house, whatever that we're building, and we know we just need to cap it at this point. So it becomes clear as we're going. So you're kind of like creating, you're doing what you do, throwing stuff out there, and then when you start having the sections, then even if it's a really long song, then you can understand where, kind of like where it's going to end. You might have to build the ending. It might be like a real epic Dream Theater ending with the big chords and the things, building and growing and, that kind of glory thing. But or sometimes it's the ending is just kind of there. It's one of the sections that just, you just need to put a tag on it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's definitely one of the skills, I think, of this collective, is that we are able to not only come up with a bunch of ideas and cool stuff, but we also able to kind of like shape it.
Definitely. And the final question I wanted to ask you is, I have one more for you, is because you have so many albums out now that I think are great representations of who Dream Theater are. And, every time I listen to an album, like when I listen to 6 Degrees, I feel like I'm 8 years old in second grade when I first heard that album. And, yeah. But like, do you find it better if a song represents that moment in time? Do you want it to almost be a time staple, or do you almost feel like songs develop and evolve over time and maybe have new context as you get older and wiser, and maybe have new meanings as it moves along.
I'm not sure I understand your question.
Oh,
You mean the way I perceive
yeah,
it, or the
yeah,
way?
the way that you perceive it, yeah.
Oh. Well, I find that, well, first of all, I find that in the genre that we kind of operate in, that it's not like straight ahead pop music or like fashionable music. There's a lot of deeper stuff that goes. You're kind of filling a track with a lot of intricacy and a lot of things that take time to absorb. And I feel like even some of my favorite like prog albums, like a Close to the Edge or Trick of the Tail or something like that, I just listen to them even to this day, and they still have meaning. I guess the reason I'm not bored with them is because they are deeper. So time does kind of lend itself to gaining new perspective on this music. And I would hope that Dream Theater's music has that for people too, where you could listen to 6 Degrees and you could connect with it as something that you heard and were inspired by then, but also gave you some new meaning even now. I mean, that would be, to me, that would be like the best progressive music. That's like almost like the meaning of progressive music.
Yeah.
Some of my favorite albums, when I first listened to them, I didn't even understand what the hell I was listening to. And I'd listen, but somehow it brought me back to listen to again, and then again, and then I go, oh my God, I really like this. It's amazing.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, you get the best of both worlds because I feel like a song, one Dream Theater song, has so much evolution, and then the album has a lot of evolution, and then the life that comes after it has a lot of evolution.
yeah, that's cool. I mean, if that's what's happening, then that's kind of like, I think, the best thing that could come of a musical album or song.
Definitely. Well, Jordan, thank you so much for being here today. Everybody, we are here with Jordan of Dream Theater. Be sure to check out A View from the Top of the World, coming out October 22nd. This is Alex from Heavy New York. We will see you next time.
Thanks, Alex. Cool. Nice to be with you, man.